everyone, welcome back to another hardware news recap of the week. In this one, we'll be talking about Intel leaking itself. We're also talking about NVIDIA moving to annual architecture launches in a big change for the company. And the PS5 gets a slim edition. Kind of. They're not calling it that, but that's what it is. We also ran some more CPU benchmarks for Counter-Strike 2 with a console command to change FPS max. So we'll have those numbers in this video. And we've got a couple other news items like major price drops for the 7900 XT that are actually making it very interesting right now. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Thermaltake swappable blade fans, available in 120 and 140 millimeter sizes. The new Thermaltake fans include 3 sets of swappable blades, so that even as you change builds or cases, you can ensure the LEDs are always presented on their best side. The swappable blades allow builders to get the fan frame out of the way of the lights by reversing the blade direction to reconfigure the fan as push or pull, while keeping the struts relatively hidden, and keeping the fan frame oriented one way. Swapping blades is done by applying pressure evenly to opposite sides, then pressing until the click. Each fan also has pin-to-pad connections for cableless daisy chaining, and you can learn more at the link in the description below. First up, very brief note. So we're currently doing that charity drive through the store where 10% of our store product sales are going to support Cat Angels, the local cat shelter. We've built computers for them in the past, we visited them, and they do great work. That drive we've been running for a couple weeks now, and this is the end of it. So if you want to grab something from our store to support us and them at the same time, this is the best time to do that. You can go to store.gamersnexus.net, and that promotion will be ending in the next couple of days here. And then at that point, I'll tally up the amount and donate to them. We'll update you what it was. If you want to grab an item, we have these shirts in stock. They are the RGB GPU glitched out on the front, plus a GN logo on the back. And then you should also check out our coaster packs if you want something that is highly unique to computer hardware and also a high quality flexible material. Or for something for building, you can grab one of our solder and project mats, which are great for all kinds of work. They're highly heat resistant, they're easy to clean, and they're also good for things like model building or painting. And of course, you can grab one of our GN15 updated large mod mats with a lot of new diagrams on it and the GN15 design, plus new information like the front panel connectors, DDR5 sizing, and more. Quick breaking news story here. We actually filmed this whole video. We're going back to add this. It is so breaking that my background is still turning on. We've been covering Microsoft's attempts to buy Activision since they started back in January of 2022. And after facing massive challenges in the US, but especially the UK, Microsoft's purchase of Activision has now been approved. Reuters reported that Microsoft's Phil Spencer will assume control over Activision after a potential departure of Bobby Kotick, which seemingly might happen at the end of the year. Microsoft's Phil Spencer stated this on Twitter, quote, "Today is a good day to play. We officially welcome Activision Blizzard King to Team Xbox. Together we'll create the world's biggest monopoly." No, wait, that's not what this says. I misread that. "Together, we'll create stories and experiences that bring players together in a culture empowering everyone to do their best work and celebrate diverse perspectives." Not really sure what any of that has to do with buying Activision, but okay. Big company things. Part of the deal required Microsoft to forego acquiring Activision's streaming, the game streaming arm of its business and streaming rights, wherein Ubisoft became the buyer of Activision's game streaming side of things. This comes as a requirement from the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK. Now, multiple business outlets reported that this is the largest ever acquisition in gaming, with some noting similar for tech companies. For perspective, AMD bought ATI for $5.6 billion in 2006. So $68.7 billion is insane for a gaming company. A big one, but still. The concerns here are entirely related to competition. First and foremost, Microsoft makes the Xbox a competitor to Sony's PlayStation. Obviously, we all know this, but now owning such a large force in game publishing and development, there's, even if short-term there have been agreements to prevent this, there's still concerns about long-term consolidation of power in a way which could become anti-competitive in more than just sort of the buzzword way. It's a more significant, like, no, seriously, we're taking away a meaningful large brand with intellectual property, games that people care about, and potentially putting it under one hardware manufacturer's umbrella. those would be the main considerations. This is all brand new, fresh news. There's not much more than that right now, but it's a big deal. It's been in the works for a while, and there were a couple blockades, but as usual, they've all faltered or fallen, and Microsoft has made the concessions that the CMA and other agencies have asked of them, and now they've bought Activision Blizzard King. Up first, NVIDIA will be upping its pace for architectural generations, and this is official news. It's not a leak. This is NVIDIA telling everyone, and that starts with Blackwell in 2024 and an unnamed architecture in 2025. So it's looking to move to annual architectural launches, and that would speed things up. It actually just recently talked about slowing them down, but that was in the gaming segment specifically, where NVIDIA had, there was an Ada Lovelace Next named architecture. So not a rumor. This was released during the October investor presentation, and the slide shows the die names of several of NVIDIA's recent chip designs per year, with the most relevant to our audience being the middle row in bold. These 100 class dies have historically been the largest version of the consumer GPU architecture, but some recent architectures have limited them to enterprise and to professional markets, like with Volta and with Hopper, shown here as the H100. That's where it gets interesting though. The slide shows 2024 as slated for both a Hopper refresh called H200 and a next generation chip called B100. That should be the largest design of the future Blackwell architecture. You're going to start seeing that name more. It's named for mathematician David Blackwell. After that, in 2025, NVIDIA has X100. The X likely is a placeholder for an unannounced architecture name, because the options there are either placeholder, named after a scientist or a mathematician whose last name starts with the letter X, Professor X maybe, and the third option, of course, is Elon Musk is involved. So this sets the pace for one new architecture per year, which is faster than the past several years. The rise of machine learning for generative AI in both training and inference is obviously a massive part of why NVIDIA is pushing so hard here. The presentation summary mentions it actually 3 times and calls it a, quote, $1 trillion market opportunity. NVIDIA is going to play it up as hard as they can for investors naturally, but the generative AI industry trend has a lot more staying power versus the past crypto crazes that NVIDIA has also at times endorsed and at other times rejected, depending on what was convenient. It's also possible that other major tech companies are positioning themselves more competitively in the space than NVIDIA originally foresaw, according to a write-up from Semi-Analysis. It also claims that AMD has canned the MI350X variant of the MI300 in response to NVIDIA's accelerated pace. So right now, we don't know if Blackwell will be one of the limited data center or enterprise-only type designs, or if it'll be more like Ampere with the 30 series, where there are products up and down the stack for most of the markets that NVIDIA covers. We previously covered that NVIDIA marked the 40 series successor again, coming as Ada Lovelace Next. It'll probably have a different name. And that would be 2025 based on NVIDIA's own presentation a few months ago from an ML Commons event. We think it's unlikely that NVIDIA has just in a couple of months completely changed its strategy to go from we're going to release only architectures every few years to every year. And so probably these things are existing simultaneously, and they're still focusing on major gaming launches being staggered, so alternating years, which actually is not that crazy if it's a 24 to 36 month cadence. And then the data center focused stuff looks like that would be the annual updates. But who knows? They could bridge them and split them off too into refreshes and things like that. Sony has finally announced the long-rumored PlayStation 5 Slim. It's not called the Slim officially, but that's what it is. According to Sony, this is 30% smaller, and it is 18 to 24% lighter than the existing PlayStation 5s. Now, the exterior design also gets a revamp here, and they'll be available ahead of the holiday season. So Sony is targeting November sometime for this. The pricing will be the same as the original pricing for the current disc and digital versions, where they're targeting a $500 and $450 price point. Now, once the old models sell through, Sony is not planning to replenish them, so this will be the replacement going forward, effectively, again, the PS5 Slim. Nearly all of the technical specifications are the same, except for storage, which gets a bump up to 1 terabyte versus the original PS5's 825 gigabyte capacity. With games getting larger all the time, even console games, that's so welcomed bump. You might be able to fit one Call of Duty patch in that capacity. The next biggest change is in the HD Blu-ray disc drive. Sony made it modular, so it can be added or removed by the user without disassembling the console itself. This is great because disassembling the device is not particularly easy. Sony shows an exploded view of how the drive attaches, which also illustrates how the side panels are now subdivided top and bottom, with the top panel being glossy and the bottom panel being matte. That also means that users aren't stuck with a diskless console if they opt for the cheaper digital version initially. This standalone drive, $80. So going that route would still end up costing $30 more than just buying the disc version in the first place if you might ever want that. There are a couple new accessories coming from Sony though. While the new PS5 comes with a small horizontal stand, it's missing a vertical one. That's critical. Coincidentally, Sony is launching the new Premium, as it's calling it, vertical stand for $30, compatible with all versions of the console. We don't know about you, but we welcome our new premium stand overlords. Having peasantly, unsightly stands for the commoners really isn't befitting of such a luxurious device as a PlayStation 5. Only a premium stand can support such a device. Frankly, $30 isn't even enough. We won't rest until Sony makes a $700 stand. It should cost at least the same as Apple's monitor mount. Finally, Sony is taking a page out of Dbrand's book, just not that page, and they're offering alternate colors for the exterior plates. Unfortunately, there aren't any pictures yet, but the new colorways are matte black, volcanic red, cobalt blue, and sterling silver. They start at $55. Now it makes sense why Sony sued Dbrand. Dbrand could have made money, and that money is Sony's. They rightfully own it. They made the console. Anything even remotely attached or adjacent to it is now their money. Very disappointing to see this kind of turn of events where clearly Sony wanted to provide its own first-party colorful plates for its consoles, and it almost comes across as, the concern here for us is that there's this trend of consolidation where first-party manufacturers, this happens in the PC space, happening in console space, but are pulling in as much of the supply as they can, restricting things, building things in a way where it's difficult to modify them, add on to them, repair them in some instances. It's not like a right to repair thing. This is just like a right to own the device and have a third-party ecosystem of partners who make their own cool stuff that can strap to the device. You have it in PCs for the most part, are pretty good about still having this. Historically, cars have had this sort of thing. Anywhere you can modify the actual base device you bought, it keeps the interest alive in the entire segment. So whether that's cars or computers or console gaming, and it also opens up opportunities for oversights in design to be corrected, or something as simple as the color of the console, if it's purely aesthetic even, it's only a good thing if you as the owner can buy things like plates to attach to the PS5 to make it fit your theme of your room or something. And while, yes, Sony is now going to be trying to provide that, it's really not the same for it to be first party. So anyway, this has been a tangent about something that's been bothering us, is the consolidation and drawing in of add-on devices and modifications to only first party. Okay, Intel accidentally leaks itself. So here's a brief one. Intel mistakenly leaked the entire lineup of its CPUs for the upcoming 14th gen, rumored to be launching on October 17th, and that is Raptor Lake Refresh. So part of an otherwise mundane product change notification, which is an official Intel thing. This isn't like a leak from some unnamed source. It's from Intel. So there's a product change notification for the design of new CPU trays. That's how bizarre this story, like the source of this, it's not about the processors, it's about the trays that hold the processors. Anyway, all of the CPUs one could predict are listed. They range from the i3 14100F to the i9 14900K and everything in between. The only omission is a 14900KS, but typically that would be a specially binned Halo part that comes after the launch, normally as a standalone if one were to exist. We've been talking about this for a couple weeks now from the rumors, but the 14700K is the one that is supposedly going to have a core change. The E-core count specifically will be different as opposed to the 13700 series, and that is where it might be able to differentiate itself in a larger way, make it a more interesting product, and we'll see. Hopefully we'll be able to review it soon, and if so, we'll be able to talk about if that deviation is enough to make it maybe a more interesting gaming part than, say, an i9 in its stead. Our next item is a quick Counter-Strike 2 CPU benchmark update with some additional numbers. This wasn't worth running standalone because it's just basically going to be 2 charts, and we didn't want to artificially stretch the video to 10 minutes and 1 second, so we're putting it in news just to get the information out there, but not take a whole video slot and disrespect everyone's time. All right, so our CS2 CPU benchmarks were run with low and medium settings at 1080p mostly. We had some 720 numbers in there also and some Vulkan numbers previously. We used the in-game menu for changing the settings. In that menu, we intentionally disabled things like reflex to eliminate a variable not available on other hardware other than NVIDIA, and we also turned off FSR because we didn't want that influencing the results. What we didn't do was make any changes to the INI files, CFG files, or use console commands to bypass certain settings and limits within the game. So some of our viewers notified us when we published the CPU benchmark that CS2 has an FPS_max default value of 400, which can be tweaked in the console by hitting tilt. Now, others told us that bypassing the FPS max functionality and eliminating it was problematic in beta, where apparently it greatly affected the lows and the frame time pacing and made things worse if you eliminated that FPS max value. Now, we didn't test it in the beta, so we can't say for sure, but maybe that's why Valve had the value set to begin with. And that's something that we saw as well, where there's some additional frame time variability with FPS max uncapped in some instances. Either way, we decided to run some additional tests for CS2 with FPS_max disabled via a console command. A couple things here. The original data is completely accurate as it was tested, so this is additional information with FPS max tweaked, but the original data as it was run is representative to how the game performs basically out of the box with only in-game menu tweaks and without console commands. But we know some people play with this tweak, and honestly, it's a little weird CS has FPS max at all and not exposed to the menu. That seems odd. Maybe there's an intentional reason Valve did it. But we wanted to go back in and run the test for those users who do use it with it disabled. And it's interesting as well to see the X3D is getting some additional scaling. So that's been exciting to look at. Let's get into it. Here's the uncapped chart. Some of this data is uninteresting. We'll start there. The R5 5600X demonstrates that anything which was sufficiently below 400 FPS, especially results under 370 originally, are all largely unchanged. The average is technically slightly lower in this round, but there were updates to the game in between, and we're within 2% of last time. So they're functionally the same. We'd call that variance, especially with the game getting patched multiple times. That means everything below the 360 to 370 FPS average range from our last data set can be considered functionally unaffected by changing the FPS max value, or at least there would be no meaningful change. There would be no point in retesting any of them because they're just not close enough to that limit. So now we get into the interesting data. The AMD R7 7800X3D was already held in high regard in our last CS2 benchmark with the default console configuration, and we praised it there because of how well it did. But now it's even better. Oddly, the frame pacing doesn't keep up proportionally. Again, maybe this is why Valve limits that, but the average is definitely stronger. At 573 FPS average, the CPU that was leading before is now further ahead. The advantage over the 13900KF is 12% when both are uncapped, whereas the previous advantage was primarily in the lows and not the average. Speaking of the 13900K, it still has the same frame pacing issues that we saw with the FPS Max 400 set, except now they're even more exaggerated and distant from the average. A 142 result, 0.1% lows, is drastically lower than the average performance, and it's disproportionate from the other CPUs. Clearly breaks rank from the scaling. So for the rest, the 7700X and 13700K are roughly tied. The 13900KF with E-cores disabled significantly improves the 0.1% lows as we saw last time, but now it's at the cost of reduced average frame rate. This is, we think, a worthwhile trade. Interestingly, the E-core behavior was better with the 400 FPS cap, where average and 0.1% were closer to each other, but it was still not good. And the way to remedy this would be by either using something like Process Lasso. It seems like CS2 isn't using the right cores, or by using the BIOS scroll lock toggle that some boards have to actively, within Windows, modify the E-core behavior. The 5800X3D is still doing great, but now that we're uncapped, we can see that it would have stopped scaling around 456 FPS average before, which allows the 78X3D to show an architectural advantage, netting it 26% advantage. The 13900KF also boosts ahead of the 58X3D now, but the 58X3D retains better lows proportionally. For one bonus chart, we talked about the E-core issues last time with the 13900K. They remain present here. So that was my immediate curiosity was, okay, if we unbind this, does it instantly improve? Answer is no. The game is just not targeting the right cores, as in the best ones, in every instance when it's run for these high core count CPUs that are a heterogeneous architecture. So we already diagnosed that, but here's a messy frame time chart to show it all at once. All you need to know is that red and green represent the E-cores being enabled, and blue and orange are E-cores disabled. You'll notice that blue and orange are almost impossible to see, and that's because they don't have any excursions spiking above 6 milliseconds. They are incredibly stable and have good frame time pacing. One of the passes with the red line hit 47 milliseconds, a deviation of about 43 on its own from the prior frame. That'd be noticeable as a stutter. This doesn't happen constantly, but it did occur in just 2 of these 4 passes. The other 2 passes also have noticeable spikes. They're just not here because it'd be too messy. But again, Process Lasso or Affinity mapping or scroll lock toggling E-cores would help this. So that's the bench update. Hopefully that helps out those of you who wanted to see the numbers with that setting changed in the console. And the biggest interesting thing here, it's the same story we saw where the X3D CPUs are really good in Counter-Strike 2, but now we can see sort of the full scaling, although it's kind of interesting to see the lows pacing not being always proportional, which is perhaps a game issue, and it's one they're working on that they've talked about at Valve. So that's it for this update. Let's go to the next one. Unity's CEO steps down. So Unity CEO John Riccitiello is retiring from the company effective immediately per a press release from Unity. That was on October 9th. Riccitiello was the face of the insane changes that Unity announced recently regarding its payment model and how it's treating developers with things like runtime fees. And Riccitiello was bringing this change to the Unity community. Now, we said he was the face of the changes, and there's some truth to this. It's really just the face of it, because the evil parasitic brain that remains behind and guiding the changes would probably be the board of directors, and they're still there. So for those who don't know the corporate world, the board of directors has an ultimate. When it uses the ultimate, it's able to force the CEO to step down or pursue new opportunities. It depends on approximately the age of the CEO. They might be spending more time with family, or they might be pursuing new and exciting opportunities that you'll hear about soon. But in either case, the board of directors uses this ultimate, and henceforth the CEO is dispatched from the company. Now, there's a benefit to this. It gets an instant heal, and it gets a charisma buff for consumer-facing interactions. Both of these things are very valuable right now. Unfortunately, when it ejects the CEO, there's a cooldown timer, and during that cooldown, the board of directors ends up slithering around on the ground in its base form, where it has to find a new host as fast as possible. And if it finds a bad one, it won't be able to use the ultimate again for a while. So it'll have to stick with that new face. This is like a, I don't know. I thought it would be cool to design like a game around the Unity. Anyway, the goal of all of this, hoping that anyone looking on is confused enough to think that there's been something important that actually changed. Unity's lead independent director of the Unity board had this to say about Riccitiello's time with the company. Quote, "John has led Unity through incredible growth over the last nearly 10 years, helping us transition from a perpetual license to a subscription model, enabling developers to monetize, building other game services to serve our creator community, leading us through an IPO, and positioning us as a pioneer in the developer community. Unity would not be where it is today without the impact of his contributions." That's for damn sure. Unity would not be in this quagmire it has created without the contributions of their scapegoat that they've just found. So that's about right for a serial executive and ruthless monetizer who, again, pitched the concept of charging players for reloads in Battlefield. Prior to Riccatello's retirement, the controversial policies were partially walked back, so there was some good that came out of this. And Unity's head of Unity Create posted an update after effectively the entire game dev side of the internet was enraged for a couple weeks in September. So aside from the apology, there are actual actions and changes listed within. First off, the Unity personal plan will continue to be free, and there will be no runtime fee for games built with Unity Personal. All of this was effective immediately. On top of that, no games with less than $1 million in revenue over a rolling 12-month period will have to pay the runtime fee. The runtime fee policy won't apply until the 2024 LTS version, or long-term support, of Unity comes out next year. Additionally, once a game qualifies for the fee under these new terms, Unity is offering the choice of either a 2.5% revenue split or the calculated amount based on the number of new users on the game each month. Now, all of this effectively and immediately eliminates the biggest concern, which was developers potentially ending up in a situation where they unwittingly owe Unity more money than they would have made from the game itself. So that could have happened under the previously announced fee structure. What we're seeing here, that is eliminated as far as we can tell. So that's a major move. It is the right change. There's lingering kind of concerns and damage here for Unity, but between these changes and Riccatello stepping down, it's clear that the board is at least trying to make amends enough to continue profiting. That said, Unity has likely done irreparable damage. Now, all of this comes at a very interesting time because Epic Games has had its own layoffs, and those layoffs affected the Unreal Engine team. Unreal Engine being the biggest competitor to Unity, suddenly having a drawback on its potential development or marketing or whatever that team did, capabilities, will reduce Epic's ability to capitalize on the situation where Unity is bleeding some of its developers who are looking for new avenues. And so Epic will have some opportunity lost here where they could capitalize on it. And this may lead with the two of the largest engines, it may lead to a scenario where there's sort of a Blender-like renaissance for game engines. And there are open source engines out there. We don't particularly cover them or know a ton about them. I know some of the names. In this situation, it may be the case that some of these developers move to those open source engines and maybe there's a sudden influx of contributions to them in a way that could, as I said, make for a Blender-like scenario where something very strong could emerge. So it's going to be really interesting to follow this in the long term. All right, back to hardware. AMD's RX 7900 XT has had some massive price drops over the months, but especially recently. So we were looking around on Newegg and Amazon for PC parts while reviewing stuff, and we noticed that the 7900 XT, particularly with the new Power Color Hellhound, is as low as $720 right now. Massive drop from the $900 launch price that was problematic. This is kind of classic AMD. They launched something within months, it's the price it should have been. And it's a little unfortunate because that initial impression is tied to the value that the original price creates. So as they drop the price and settle into the market a little more, the cards become far more interesting, but the initial launch hype has passed. And it's always hard to recapture that. It doesn't matter how much we talk about or anyone else. Like once the card's launched, people aren't as interested in it. So it's $180 down from the original $900 price. Other variants are available for $10 to $20 more. And that much of a price slide makes it a potentially really good candidate to reevaluate. So let us know if you'd like to see that. Similarly, the R7 7800X3D is on sale for $350 from both Amazon and Newegg right now, which is close to the cheapest it's ever been. We'll link those below as well. And there was a single day at the start of the month where it was $335 from Newegg, but even at $350, it's a really good option for a fresh gaming build or potentially as a drop-in upgrade if you got an R5 7600 or something and you're looking for more performance. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, we had a ton of content the past week. Go check it out. We reviewed the RK580. It's a new GPU. It's about $180. We talked about the A750 being $190 now in that same review. And we also posted another mini ITX case review of the Dan Case A4 H2O. That one was really fun Check that out as well. And there's the Ally non-extreme version that we've tested to look at how it performs versus the Ally Z1 Extreme. So a ton of stuff up. Check it out. And as always, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net to support us directly and patreon.com/gamersnexus. Thank you for watching. We'll see you all next time.